Topic number 2. SEGA has launched a new service, or I don't know what you call it, on mobile devices called SEGA Forever, where they are bundling a whole bunch of classic SEGA games through emulation on your device. Now, first of all, I'm not a big fan of, I was at first when, we first had iPhones and you had the ability to get games and, you can just use a screen to touch the buttons and have like a virtual digital crosshair on that. And now this does work with external controllers, which you can put onto, the side, or a Bluetooth controller that's made for the iPhone or the iPad that you can use with those two. I literally thought at one point that was going to supersede console gaming, and that did not happen at all. But what's interesting about this is, shocker, you'd think with the success Nintendo had with the NES Classic and the demand that Sega could do something like this, and this just feels so Sega. And I don't mean to bash Sega fans. There's Sega games that I like, but it's always like to kind of just don't put forth the care into their IP that Nintendo does, because apparently they wrapped all these games in a Unity envelope or whatever and then just put it out quick. But the emulation apparently is just shitty. It's like dropping frames. It's not that good. Sega's even put out statements, they're working to improve it or whatever. And I'm thinking, man, I get you're probably doing this because someone in a boardroom is thinking, well, Nintendo's making a lot of bank off of this nostalgia factor. We got this IP. We may as well do it here. If we spend X amount and do this, we can just bulk put all the games in one program. Let's just do this and get it out on a chart.
What can we get for $1 million?
Oh, my God. And it's just, why? What the hell? And then they were even talking about maybe even having this Sega Forever, which has ads built into it while you're playing the games too. That's why it's free unless you pay for it, and then you don't have the ads. If they even tried something like that on Nintendo, I can't imagine Nintendo being okay with that. Just the quality of the experience you'd have, Nintendo would be like, fuck that, but who knows?
Well, that real estate on the screen is important. You think about Nintendo games, on a side-scroller, what part of the screen are you going to take away?
Well, that's the thing is, in their defense, I don't know how the ads are baked in. I don't know if they're on the screen all the time or if they're just at a portion when you load a game or in between levels. I don't know how that
on the sides.
Who knows? Yeah, could be.
Just keeps it in standard format and you're just getting sidebars.
Yeah, I really don't know. But, man, this
I
just...
didn't go out and download it.
This just feels so Sega-like, half-assed, Not Nintendo.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the thing about the Sega... So they were the first ones to claim to have 16-bit, but I think that was kind of a fallacy, because I think the way that they did it is they were running two 8-bit things together to make 16. There was something about the Sega Genesis that was different than the Super Nintendo.
Sure, I mean 16-bit, just the terminology, just like what's actually going through the process, how many bits it's processing at one time through the central processor. It was a 16-bit system. Now, one 16-bit system versus another, that's not the only factor, you're right, that goes into a console. There's everything from, well, what's the audio chips in there? How many channels do they have? What's the coloring aspect?
But I think the architecture that they used was just different.
Yeah, it came out 2 years before the Super Nintendo or the Super Famicom did. I mean, they really wanted to be first to market, because when they put out their 8-bit system, which was then called the Sega Master System, didn't dent Nintendo's market share like at all. In fact, I challenge you to find someone that even knows what the Sega...
haven't heard of it.
Exactly. Then the Genesis comes out in Japan first. Doesn't do really well in Japan, but in the U.S. they really came out with a great marketing campaign. Sonic the Hedgehog does what Nintendo don't. Came out with a more adult audience.
Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, that was huge.
Those are the big titles that sold it.
Mm-hmm. And it got, I mean, it definitely didn't dethrone Nintendo by any stretch of the imagination, but it did way better than the Master System did. But by the time Nintendo put out theirs...
3 buttons.
Uh-huh.
Instead of just 2.
Yep.
Which made it better.
But by the time Nintendo...
Than a regular NES, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And by the time the Nintendo came out with their Super Nintendo, they had better technology in there. It could display more colors on the screen at once. That was a big deal. The sound was leaf bound.
Remind me with the Super Nintendo, too. It had the left and right buttons.
Yeah,
too,
the
right?
L and R, YB, and XA.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you had 6 buttons, which then, of course, Sega eventually came out with their own 6-button controller, but still... Yeah, you're right. The Super Nintendo trounced it in abilities, and then you also had all that great Nintendo IP and the third-party software. When you compare the entire catalog from Nintendo to Sega, it wasn't even close. I just thought
I'm trying to think, were there any crossover titles between the two at that point? Like, when did we see our first crossover titles?
Oh, I mean, like the Madden games were on both. EA Sports games were on both. Mortal Kombat was on both.
Well, and I guess I say that, but then I think about like ColecoVision and Atari had crossover titles too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because on the ColecoVision you could get Donkey Kong,
Mm-hmm.
and it was also available on Atari at the time.
Right.
But ColecoVision was really strong on the graphical. They wanted to emulate the arcade experience more so than Atari.
Yep.
They just wanted to make things for the home.
You got to remember Sega Altered Beast. Because I remember that one.
Altered Beast is one of the things. I wrote that down when we were talking about this. That was like one of the games.
That gets so much.
Sonic the Hedgehog and Altered Beast.
Yeah.
Those were the two games I remember playing on there apart from Mortal Kombat.
And Altered Beast gets such hate today. I still remember that game as being like, this is so much cooler than Nintendo graphics.
Yeah. You get like 3 of those orbs and then you
power up your beast.
And then, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was like bringing the arcade home, so that was cool. I do have fond memories of Sega. It just seems like they don't treat their Sega. And now with the Sonic Forces game coming out and the Sonic Mania coming out, it looks like they're really putting a lot of care in it. That's great. But if you look the entirety of the Sonic the Hedgehog line, it's like, man, you're just not treating this with the same amount of care that Nintendo treats their IP. And this is just another example of that with this service.
Yeah, it's just and like in the article that you sent me, it's one of those things where it definitely sounds like they got to the boardroom and they're like, well, I don't want to spend that much.
Right.
So then they went with the cheaper option.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody got, was the cheaper option.
Yep, pretty much. Users, this is according to Game Tyrant, users say Sega Forever titles riddles with bugs. Don't they realize what's going to happen if they put this out there without testing?
No doubt. The internet's alive now.
Oh my God! You
can't put articles out there you published yourself and try to sell your stuff because everybody else has a voice.
Yeah, and there's some Sega IP that I have nostalgia. Remember Toe Jam and Earl? That stuff. That brings back a lot of memories. That would be fun to sit down with on the couch with a buddy and recreate some of those memories. But here's how I would sum up Sega's mentality, at least from an appearance standpoint, from where I'm coming from. Good enough.
Yeah. This will make us money.
Yeah. I mean, I think, didn't they even put out like a Sega console box that actually had a whole bunch of games? It was like 80 games programmed into it.
Yeah, I think it might be third party, but there's definitely, you can go to Target right now and buy that Sega Genesis console or whatever, where it's preloaded with 80 games.
It's like 80 games and it's $50, way cheaper, and still no one's buying it. That's just sad. Well, hey.
You probably go to the Goodwill and find one.
For all of you watching, when you can't get your hands on a Super Nintendo Classic Edition, remember, there is a Sega emulator out there, either available on your iPhone, iPad, or Android that apparently is shit, or you can get this box that nobody's buying. So we do have other
you may have
options
to buy something so that you can plug the RCA cables into the back of your high-definition television.
How cool would that be if the Sega box that's out there actually does come with the UHF converter that you have to then buy the cables to actually convert that in there, and then they can say, we just wanted to go the full nostalgia route, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, God, that would be awesome.
And it only has 2.
Yep.
So you don't get stereo sound. You just get the right speaker and the video.
Yep. Well, for those of you out there that have either found the Sega box or using the Sega service, let us know what you think about the emulation quality. Is it up to snuff, and would you recommend it to others? Let us know what you think in the comments below.